Our modern disconnection did not start with social media or the internet or the television or even the radio. And today we are going to hear from the GOAT himself, Thomas Pynchon, on where our disconnection truly started. And Pynchon hits the nail on the head with this one because the answer is not sexy. You can't talk about dopamine and brain rot and look at what's happening to the kids today when you think about it from Pynchon's angle, but rather you have to look at the loss of something in our soul that is so much deeper. And that's what so many great authors like Thomas Pynchon and Cormac McCarthy focus on in their work. That's why the literary community calls them the greatest authors of all time, because they find these pivotal moments, the actual axiomatic root of all of our problems now, and build narratives around them. Turn on the nostalgia machine so that people like you and I can truly see what happened. And here on Right Conscious, I talk about the best books and authors of all time. And of course, that includes Thomas Pynchon. In the playlist down below, you will find dozens of videos on Pynchon's books, his life, and his philosophy towards so many different things. And so if you guys want to learn more about Pynchon, whether you are an expert or a beginner, then be sure to subscribe, and let's now hop into it. So the problem with all the commentary on modern disconnection is that it's done through modern mediums. It's done with video essays, in movies, in podcasts, or whatever. And most of the time, those are ephemeral. They will disappear and be forgotten about very soon. They are just kind of these engagement boosting content that is just pointing out a problem, getting everyone all hoorah'd and yes, I agree, and then really not offering any solutions or any kind of in-depth analysis of it. And the only in-depth analysis we have of many of these things are gatekept by like academics, and it's just boring, like you don't want to read it. And in Thomas Pynchon's Against the Day, he shows us where our true disconnection started. And an interesting note is that so many great authors, Pynchon, DeLillo, McCarthy, Morrison, Volman, Kasho Ishiguro, by the time they reach kind of the end of their career, they have a tapestry of around the last 150 years in terms of when their stories take place. And a lot of the time, they are these beautiful studies on how we got where we are right now. Because instead of focusing on facts or this political party did this or this event happened, it focuses on people. It focuses on the feelings and the emotions of the time and what it felt like to be in these transition periods. Because many of us feel like when we look back at the past that all these people were ignorant to these transitions that they were going through. But you and I know that this modern technological transition period that we are in right now is going to lead to something much darker. We're not going to come out of this probably in a much more positive way. We can see where this is going. Anyone with a conscious mind can see where all this is going. But the problem is that most of our population is not conscious and is not willing to make sacrifices in their income or in their life or really in anything to change the dynamics that are being projected onto us. And so that's something that Pynchon does really well, is that he sets up these cultural moments, these big ideas, and provides us characters who are thinking through them. Are they being geniuses? Are they being this omniscient, hey, look, I told you so type character? Absolutely not. But it's a really effective way to make people like you and I get into kind of the root causes, the causal factors of where we're at now. Because if we don't understand the causal factors, we can't create any solutions. And so Thomas Pynchon believes, as we're about to see in this quote, that modern disconnection started when, quote, the frontier ends and disconnection begins, cause and effect. But if the frontier was gone now, did that mean Lou was about to be disconnected too from himself, sent off into exile, into some silence beyond silence, as retribution for a remote and ancient vice always just about to be remembered, half-stunned, in a half-dream like a surgeon's knot, taken swiftly in the tissue of time and pulled snug, delivered into the control of potent operatives who did not wish him well. And I got more quotes that we're going to talk about in a second, but wow. So Pynchon traces our lack of connection, this fracture, back to the frontier ending. And he actually explores this a lot in Mason and Dixon too, which is partially about mapping the world and exploring the ends of the earth. But when the United States ran out of land, something else happened. We ran out of our psychological horizon. All these open spaces, the frontier that once promised a new life for so many different people, then leads to what? Once all of it gets closed off, what starts to happen? Well, it starts to get consolidated. The next waves of the millionaires back then and these new groups start to come in, and the land starts to get barbed wire. This is what Cormac McCarthy talks about in his Border trilogy, which is a masterpiece. We no longer had these ways to reinvent ourselves. And so the only way we could, because this adventure no longer existed, was within ourselves. But we didn't, as a society, take this artistic road. Rather, we were forced to go into the bureaucratic world. We were forced to go not into the files of our soul, but into the files on the table, into the ledgers, into the paperwork, into the start of the surveillance society. And this is really easy to see. When the geography closes, consciousness closes. This happens a lot in modern American cities. And I know there are outliers, and I know there are exceptions. And I know that even in the most dire of circumstances in prisons and gulags all around the world, there are people who can tap into something and touch higher consciousness while under duress. But that's not the case for most people. Most people don't have that ability, no matter how many personal development seminars and YouTube videos you listen to. But the first step in this process isn't exactly loneliness, like the feeling of being alone, whether that's in the city or out in the Wild West, but it's being managed. Because if you go to New York City right now, you're free to do a lot of things, but you're also being managed. The entire grid that you are in has certain routes that you can take or not take, and you're basically forced into a system. And now, obviously, with digital technology and everything that we are experiencing, that has been heightened to an insane degree. Where do we have now to ride off to? What horizon people go to Bali now, people go to Thailand. Even that now has been commodified. And speaking of the coolest commodity on the block, the Thomas Pynchon Book Club on November 8th is going to be meeting up and talking about none other than Pynchon's new novel, Shadow Ticket. And I would love to see each and every one of you there. We have the dopest book club anywhere online. Almost every single weekend, we talk about multiple novels. We read over 5 transformative novels every single month and meet up and talk about them. Also on November 8th, we got Moby Dick. We got The Road. The classics never end. And if you go join my book club, which is on Substack, you also get access to over 100 hours of content just like this, but much more meta. Me doing deep dives into standalone books, into writing, and so many other cool things. I have full-length courses on Cormac McCarthy, David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, and so much more. But if you guys don't want to support me monetarily, I 100% understand. And that's why over on Substack, which is the home of the best readers and writers in the world, and that's why I am over there and encouraging you to go over there, I do free weekly live streams, if not multiple a week. I release free weekly interviews with really dope authors or people who have great minds in the literature space, plus free content occasionally. And so each subscription over there is the best way to support me. If you support me and the literary renaissance and what I'm doing here, I promise you I will deliver awesome content to your feed all the time. And it literally helps me to be able to do this full time and activate so many others down the line. And so thank you for the support, and let's hop back to the video. And the reason that I love this novel is that we see this transition, these ideas. Like back in the day, there was a wanted poster all around the country, and there would be a posse of dudes chasing after you. Now we have a file. Now we have an administrator assistant for the administrator who's administrating these people, and maybe one of them will open up this file and actually try to get it done. But Johnny actually has ADHD and isn't good at his job and only got in because of connections. And so this case is going to remain closed forever. And I love Pynchon's, if you guys saw like his use of hyphens, it's almost like I see like a lot of new agey people write like this. They're like soul dire when talking about soldiers, or remember, or respect, to look again. Like they love to do that. But Pynchon is doing that here, and I'll pull it back up. He says disconnected and remembered and operatives. And the layering is great because he's talking about being remembered and disconnected like a surgeon's knot. And he's being operated on. And he's talking about the fracturing, the disconnecting of the modern soul. And that's what happens in this bureaucratic world. We are cut off from the organic world and thrown into simulacra, thrown into the process. And that hops into our next quote, where Pynchon says, "Here's where the trail came to its end. At last, along with the American cowboy who used to live on it and buy it, no matter how virtuous he kept his name, and how many evildoers he's managed to get by undamaged, how he's done by his horses, what girls he has chastely kissed, serenaded by guitar, or gone out and raced hallelujah with. It's all back there in the trail dust now, and none of it matters. For down there you'll find the wet convergence of finale and his drought-struck tail and thankless calling." And the death of the cowboy is the true death of freedom. That's why we romanticize the West so much. But Cormac McCarthy knew this at the end of Blood Meridian, when in the epilogue, which isn't a spoiler, you guys, he's basically talking about how the West is being partitioned off, whether that is power lines or a railroad, or you think it's a Gnostic metaphor. It doesn't really matter. What McCarthy is trying to say is that there is a new evil coming, and he explores it in his novel The Passenger. Pynchon explores it in his novels Gravity's Rainbow and V, and like almost all of his novels. There's this new evil coming that's going to make this old evil, the evil of the Wild West and the Comanches and scalp hunters and all this insanity, the anarchists, the Pinkertons, all these people are child's play compared to the tens of millions of people that were going to unnecessarily die in the 20th century at the hands of government. And in this scene, Pynchon is connecting the cowboy to the stockyard of a slaughterhouse. That's where the trail led. And it's really interesting. It's actually a really good point. And this is like the type of stuff that Pynchon does so well. And this is the layering when he was just talking about disconnection and remembering. And we're now talking about this slaughterhouse. But he's making this broader point that when we think about a cowboy, right, they have this code. It's honor, grit, independence. But eventually, where does that code go? What happened to that code? Well, it actually got dissolved and put into a process. We now have the corporate code, being civil, acting mature, as they say. And today we've now are now undergoing something similar, where our individuality, what we retained of that for a little bit, or we could say a century after the end of the West, is now getting processed through algorithms until we're data and not people anymore. So this first process of fragmentation was taking our codes, taking this morality, this mindset, and codifying that, turning that into a simulacra, flattening that completely. And now that's what we are doing online. That's what I am doing right now. Even if I'm sharing this conscious message, I'm being turned into data. I'm being turned into content. Because when you think about the cowboy, they lived this linear life that had a direction, a trail. There was a purpose a lot of the time. There was this focus on survival. But what is happening in our modern world? Where are all these roads leading to? It's all the same point of being more productive, raising the GDP, somehow sustaining in this fake fiat market that's ever inflating so that we can just survive and even own a house or even just afford an apartment. And so now that we're in this funnel, everything is predicted. Everything is sold back to us. Even our rebellions. When you look at the hippie movement, that was manufactured, codified, and sold back to us. And we're still stuck in that mindset today. When you look at many of the rebellions of the 70s and 80s, the internet revolution, that process happened. The recent political revolutions on the left and the right were manufactured, codified, and are now being sold back to us. And us, the lower classes, are continuing to be exploited. And we've now hit a world that back in the day, these codes, right, of even back, 50, 60 years ago, being a good person, being a good citizen, doing a good job, like that stuff mattered. And, you could get killed randomly and the Comanche could come in and random things happen and people made mistakes and all of this stuff happened. But actually being civilized and actually working together and being a community were a real thing. But being a good person now does not protect you in the world of the internet. Any little mistake, you could just go viral for the wrong thing. Even the most sincere content creators or people who are actually trying to help have been ironized, flattened, commodified, and all of this. It literally doesn't matter who you are or where you go anymore. And so all of that drives this disconnection, because true disconnection happens when being good doesn't matter anymore. This is what happens, right? Like, I remember, I was an English teacher for 8 years and I tried for so long, you guys. Like I was teaching my ass off. And I remember 2 years before I stopped teaching, so 2 years ago, I tried so hard, you guys. Like I actually like was teaching. Like we read all these books. I was showing, like I was not just being like a authoritarian, like Nazi teacher, but we were having fun. Like I was doing all the lessons, following all the programs, and I was actually making them work and like read and learn for the first time. And this was in Arizona, which is one of the worst states for education, like routinely in the, number 47 through 50. And all the students, other teachers, or all my students, other teachers, weren't teaching. They were just giving out worksheets, giving out the answers, not doing anything at all. And so even though I was lecturing like I'm lecturing, not lecturing much easier, but I was bringing the energy, having fun, like trying to, teach them stuff that they would find interesting, show them crazy movies. They hated me, like straight up hated me. I wasn't being mean to them, because to get them to be able to do that meant that I had to actually have standards for behavior and actually force them to work and grade them harshly. And across the board, outside of just 2 or 3 students, they all hated me. And that had happened many times before. But my final year, I just kind of disconnected because I realized it didn't matter anymore. Being a good teacher, being a bad teacher, it didn't matter. I was still going to help 2 to 5 kids every single year, and everyone else was going to forget or not care, or they were just going to be jumping through hoops anyway. But is that the mentality that I need to have? No, because maybe I could save some kids and, blah, blah, blah. And I should be trying. But I looked at the entire system. I looked at the educational system at large, in my school, my district, my state, my world. And I was like, wait, this doesn't matter anymore. And it made it easier for me to disconnect and slide off. And it's something that we need to prevent ourselves from doing. Like, it's so hard. Like, that is kind of one of our modern quest, is to not do that. I have friends, who have wives who are, maybe not emotionally, or a little bit emotionally volatile. I'll just say it. Like, they can be a little bit crazy at times. And I'm saying that not like, oh, women are crazy type way, but they're beneath that. There's really a call for attention. There's really that there's not enough intimacy in the relationship and all of this stuff. Usually that's like a cry for help for something deeper that's fractured in the relationship, which most of the time are my friends' fault. But because they don't want to do that stuff, because they have their own commitment issues and their own intimacy issues, and they don't want to do that, then instead of fixing that, they just disconnect. They just kind of let their wife be mad at them and say, yeah, I'll fix it. Kick the can down the road a little bit. Start watching a little bit more TV, start slipping back into more habits, drinking extra beer in the backyard. All of this stuff, I have seen countless of my friends and, even my own parents and other people's parents like fall into this cycle of disconnection, because it feels like and these guys will tell me, they're like, I'm doing all these things. Like, I go to work all day. I do this, I do that. I spend as much time as I can. I try to be positive. I'm doing all this. And now I'm being nagged about these little micro things. And they feel like their goodness, what they're doing, doesn't matter anymore. And the result is that they disconnect. I could go on all day. We've all experienced this before. And so what has happened to us, if we go back to this metaphor with the cowboy had a unification between action and the self. And actually, as workers, before we, elevated a fiat currency, we had a connection between our labor, or our economy had connection to our labor and the result of it. But when you can create and inflate a fiat currency that has no connection to actual labor, then first of all, the worker and money and all this stuff basically becomes not real and gets de-incentivized. But that unity no longer exists. And so the cowboy had that, and that was fractured by the stockyard, because the labor is replaced by the machine, and our identity just becomes the function, this utility that we do that can be easily replaced, easily taught. And so in our modern world, what's happening with that is that you don't exist anymore outside of what you produce. Like, you guys see this entire world that I've created here on Right Conscious, but you don't see the rest of my life and what I'm doing. There's been a further fracturing of the self. And if you want to look at it, because we're talking about story, when you look at the story of the cowboy, it's romantic. We always get the beginning, the Unforgiven, a man goes out and he's just being a farmer, but he's really a hitman. And then he makes these choices. And then eventually there's redemption, whether on a positive or a negative arc at the end. Industrialization turned that into a process. Our lives became routine, repetition, and just the inputs and the outputs and, this mechanical nature. Now our life and our identity and our stories are what? They're trends. They're the metrics that we gauge ourselves in. Oh, Right Conscious has 50,000 subscribers. Oh, that gives him more authority, or all these different things. It's about tracking with analytics and what you guys like and what you guys don't like and yada, yada, yada. Narrative story is one of the best ways for us to connect with each other. And now that we live in a world that's run by data, that's all gone. We no longer care about the story. And when we do, it's like these advertisers trying to tell us a story and they do A/B testing. It's ridiculous. And so that's what Against the Day is really exploring. Mason and Dixon, which happens a little bit earlier, is talking about the more mechanical natures, more of these, the earliest start of this process. But this is the transition point. This is the buildup from the end of the Wild West to basically the start of World War I, where all of this, just imploded, where we got sent into this cycle where we're at now. And it's sad because at the end of that quote, it says, none of it matters. None of this matters anymore. And it's not, and I like Pynchon and I like these stories because a lot of the time there's a thread of hope, or it's nostalgic because they're not being cynical. Like people are like, it doesn't matter anymore. I can't do anything to change the system. Oh, woe is me. Like people are cynical like that. But when Pynchon says that, it's coming from a place of grief. What all of us have lost, what has driven our disconnection, is that we've lost our context in reality. It's crazy, but we have this idea that meaning needs to go be found, that you need to go to Bali, you need to do this. We have a whole societal mechanism and economic mechanism that incentivizes people trying to find meaning, whether that's in religion or the like the New Age world, or through work, or through music and hobbies and reconnecting and love, all this stuff. It's all us trying to find meaning. But what's interesting is that all throughout time, immemorial, unless you were some weird group or some lone wolf born and raised by the bears, you were assigned meaning, you were assigned a job, you were born into a place, given a name, came from a family, a part of a tribe. You had all this meaning already assigned to you. You were sent off in a direction, and then you just filled in the spaces. We're all wandering. We all have to kickstart our own journey of meaning and then fill in these spaces in this ever diverse and automatic and crazy world. It's the impossible task. And that's why people are feeling like there is less and less meaning, because we're not given any, like, you're a cowboy. Yeah, this is what you do, and this is what happens. There's an a priori to all that. The foundation is there. We've built a system that doesn't care about meaning and actually profits on us not having any, because then we find our meaning in our work and all these other random places where it doesn't actually exist. And so I want to speak to you guys now. What is the solution? How do we reopen this horizon? Because it's not geographically possible anymore. And it's interesting that when you look at like these ideas and what was happening, there was that last hoorah with like colonization and stuff with the Nazis and the communists and like all of this stuff. In Palestine, like trying to get as much geographic freedom as possible before the world closed out. And so all we have left now, because the only other way to do that is just through war, if we're talking about, geographic expansion, is like, how can we spiritually and imaginatively expand? How can we recreate that old feeling? And I think the answer is yes, but it's actually really hard. It's something that through like learning yoga and meditation, obviously reading, being an artist, spending a bunch of time out in nature, like I've kind of started to learn about. And it's one of these things that's kind of a life's journey. But we can't expect a lot of people to necessarily get into that. And if we don't get them into it, though, we're going to live in this crazy world. So how do we do that? And that's what this channel is about, everyone. I give problems and I give solutions. And the solution right here is the literary renaissance, is bringing books that have these narratives back into the public forefront, getting people to read them, building the skills that they need to be able to read them, the patience, the persistence, the connection. Obviously, spiritual practices and family and all that stuff is really important too, and that's another thing. But what we can do is read and talk about what we are reading. We can continue to try to put out great writing that's relevant to the modern context, or, do these look back historical novels. It's our job to do something. And if everybody out there does something and at least attempts to do something, we can radically change the world. And the only reason we're in this world right now is because people out there who know all this, know everything I just kind of talked about in their hearts, choose to do nothing. And even if 10 or 20% of them did something, oh my God, what would this world look like? And so reconnect to authentic things, escape simulacrum as much as possible. Explore the transcendent and descendant natures of your own soul and of external things in the world and universal laws. Do all that, put it back out to the world, and let's go, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. I love each and every one of you guys, and I will see you all very soon in my next video.